Ever get that feeling like something's just not right, like a weird vibe or something?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's kind of how it must have been for Cassie Jo Stoddart's family.
Yeah.
Back in 2006, they came home from a weekend trip,
Oh, wow.
and their 16-year-old niece was house-sitting for them. But instead of finding her safe, they walked into a scene straight out of a horror film.
Oh, geez, that's awful.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
This happened in Pocatello, Idaho,
Okay.
and Cassie's murder, well, it really shook the whole town. I mean, the details are just so disturbing, even today.
I bet.
So for this deep dive, you sent over a true crime podcast that goes deep, really deep into this case.
Right.
And it makes you think about all the dark things teenagers can get caught up in, stuff that seems like fantasy but can turn real,
Yeah.
and how sometimes the people we think we know can do things that are just unimaginable.
Totally.
And what's even crazier about this case is they found videotapes. Yeah, these tapes show the killers planning everything, their fascination with horror movies, and it's just terrifying to see how cold they were about the whole thing.
Wow.
So before we get into all that, let's set the scene for our listener.
Okay, sounds good.
So Cassie's aunt and uncle were out of town,
Right.
and she was house-sitting, pretty normal teenage thing.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
Her boyfriend, Matt, he was with her for a while that evening, but he left before things took a turn for the worse.
Yeah.
Later that night, the power went out.
Oh.
And when Cassie's family finally got back home, they found her. She had been stabbed to death.
Oh, my God.
That whole thing with the power going out, it's just so creepy, right? Like something out of a movie.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Super eerie. Adds to the whole horror movie vibe, for sure.
It really does. And get this, at first, they thought it might have been Cassie's mom's boyfriend.
What? Why?
They found his fingerprints on the circuit breaker box.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, the investigators were suspicious.
Yeah, I can see why. But I'm guessing that wasn't it.
Turns out he was an electrician. He had done some work on the house before, and his alibi for that night checked out.
Oh,
So, back to square one.
so who did they look at next?
Well, they focused on Matt, since he was the last one to see Cassie alive, as far as they knew.
Makes sense.
When they talked to him, he mentioned two friends, Brian and Tori, who had stopped by earlier that evening.
Okay. And were they suspects?
Well, they said they went to the movies after leaving Cassie's place.
Okay.
But something about their story seemed off to the investigators.
Really? What was it?
The police, they're clever, They started asking Brian all these super specific questions about the movie.
Like what?
Not just the plot, but like, what trailers did they see? Where did they sit? Did they buy snacks? The little things you'd remember if you were actually there.
Oh, that's smart. I bet you wouldn't think to make those things up if you were lying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you think happened? Did Brian crack?
I'm on the edge of my seat. What happened?
He totally did. All those detailed questions, his story just fell apart. He got flustered, his answers didn't add up, and eventually, well, he confessed.
We confessed. Oh my God, to what? What did he say?
He admitted that he and Tori, they went back to the house later that night. They were wearing dark clothes, masks,
Oh, wow.
and they attacked Cassie.
This is insane. So it wasn't random, it was planned.
That's where things get even more disturbing. Remember those videotapes I mentioned?
Yeah.
Well, they found them in a partially burned bag, and what's on those tapes, it's just horrifying. Brian and Tori, they had been planning to kill Cassie for days. They even filmed themselves talking about it.
Hold on, they recorded themselves. Are you serious? I mean, what kind of teenagers do that? What did they say? The videos are just chilling. I mean, there's this one where Brian and Tori are just driving around talking about their plans as if they were like planning a trip to the mall or something.
Seriously?
And at one point, Tori just casually says, "We're going for a high death count. We're going to make history." Like, it's nothing.
A high death count. Jeez, that's just bone-chilling. Do you think they were actually serious about, multiple victims? Or was that all just some twisted fantasy?
It's tough to say, really, but they do mention a few other names, and there's this part where they drive by someone's house, like checking if she's home alone. They're so casual about it all. It was really messed up.
Yeah, it's like they didn't even grasp the reality of what they were talking about. The line between fantasy and reality was just blurred.
Totally. It's one of the things that's so unsettling about this whole case. And they didn't just record their planning sessions. They filmed themselves at school the morning of the murder, too.
What? No way.
Yeah, there's this scene where Brian's at Cassie's locker, acting all normal, even friendly. He asks if she's seen Tori.
Wow. So creepy.
I know, and later that day, they're in the library talking to the camera like it's a confessional, bragging about skipping class to finalize their plan.
It's like they were making their own twisted documentary, turning Cassie's murder into entertainment.
Yeah.
Did they say anything in the videos about why? Like, what their motive was?
There are these little bits and pieces, little glimpses into their thinking. At one point, they talk about being atheists,
Okay.
and they say since there's no God or hell, there's nothing stopping them from being bad, in their words. It's twisted logic, but it makes you wonder if they were trying to justify it to themselves or maybe even to the camera.
It's like they needed a reason, even if it was a messed up one. Did they mention anything else that might have influenced them?
They definitely wanted to be like those dark figures they idolized. They talked about wanting to be like the Columbine shooters, like the characters from Scream.
That's also disturbing.
Yeah. They even mentioned the Zodiac Killer. It's like this weird mix of pop culture and this desperate need to be edgy and powerful.
In the end, they were just troubled kids who did something horrific.
Mm.
But those videotapes, that was pretty damning evidence. What happened when they went to trial?
They had separate trials, but the outcome was the same. Guilty. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder. Both got life without parole.
Did they appeal?
Oh, yeah. Multiple times. Brian has argued that life without parole is cruel and unusual punishment, especially because he was a minor at the time. Tory, on the other hand, he says he's innocent, claims it was all Brian's idea and he was just playing along in the videos.
Playing along. With those videos out there, how can he even say that? Did the appeals go anywhere?
Not so far. Courts upheld the original sentences. It's easy to get caught up in the legal stuff, but we can't forget the real impact of this case. What happened to Cassie devastated her family and the whole community.
Absolutely. How did her family cope with such a horrific loss? Did any of them take legal action?
Cassie's murder was a tragedy for everyone who knew her. Her younger cousin actually found her body.
Oh my gosh.
It's heartbreaking. She was overwhelmed with guilt and grief, even attempted suicide.
Oh no, is she okay now?
Thankfully, yes. But she still carries the emotional scars. Cassie's aunt and uncle, they were deeply affected too. Her aunt lost her job and her uncle turned to alcohol to deal with the grief. It just shows you how these crimes affect so many people, not just the victim.
It's so true. It's not just a case in a file. It's real people whose lives are shattered.
Exactly. Cassie's mother, Anna, she did take legal action, sued the school district.
Really? Why?
She said they knew about Brian's disturbing behavior, but didn't do anything to stop this from happening.
What kind of behavior? Was there something specific?
Apparently, when Brian was in middle school, there were 2 reports that he was planning a school shooting. One was a recorded phone call where he actually admitted it.
Wow. There was some serious red flags there. What did the school do about it?
They did interview him after the reports,
Okay.
but Brian said he was just joking. In the end, the school decided he wasn't a real threat.
You have to wonder, what if they had taken those warnings seriously? Could they have prevented this?
It's the big question that hangs over this whole case. Was it a miscommunication, a lack of understanding about teenagers, or something else? We may never know for sure.
It's frustrating to think that maybe there were chances to intervene. What happened with the lawsuit?
Despite those reports, the court said the school did everything they were legally required to do. Case dismissed.
That's hard to hear. Seems like someone should be held accountable when there are such clear warning signs. This whole case really makes you think about teenagers, you know? Their psychology, the lines between fantasy and reality, especially now with all the violent stuff in media.
You're right. It's about understanding those warning signs, separating harmless teenage angst from dangerous behavior. How do we do that? How do we intervene before it's too late?
That's something we all need to think about. It's scary to think something like this could happen anywhere. You know, like Brian and Tori, they seemed like regular teenagers on the surface. I mean, they went to school, they had friends,
Right.
but underneath it all, they had these dark fantasies.
Yeah, that's what's so unsettling about this case, how appearances can be so deceiving. How do we even spot those warning signs when someone's so good at hiding their true intentions? It's a question that's really stuck with me.
I know. It makes you wonder how many others are out there just like them blending in, waiting for their moment. You know, what can we do, like as parents, teachers, or just people who care to prevent this from happening again?
Well, this case really shows us how important it is to talk openly, especially with young people. We need to make sure they feel safe telling us about their anxieties and fears, even the dark stuff.
Yeah.
And we have to take any threat seriously, even if they seem like attention-seeking or just kids being kids.
Absolutely. Sometimes it feels like there's so many warning signs, it's hard to know what to really worry about.
Right.
But you're right. It's better to be safe than sorry. If something feels off, trust your gut and get help.
Exactly. Early intervention can make a huge difference. And while we can't protect kids from everything bad in the world, we need to be honest with them about the difference between fantasy and reality, help them think critically, especially with all the violence you see in media and online.
You're so right. Media literacy is more important now than ever. In this case, it really shows what can happen when that line between fantasy and reality gets blurred. Something else we haven't talked much about is bullying.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Brian was bullied and he was fascinated with school shootings. Those were all red flags looking back.
Definitely. Bullying can have such a lasting impact. We need to create a culture where victims feel safe speaking up and getting help.
This case also made me think about Brian and Tori after their convictions. What happened to them?
They're both serving life sentences without parole in the same prison. I've heard they don't talk to each other, but they've done some interviews over the years.
It'll be fascinating to hear what they say now about what they did so many years later. Have they changed their views at all?
Well, in some interviews, Brian has said he did it for notoriety. He wanted to be seen as big and bad.
Oh, wow.
He's admitted that he was obsessed with the Columbine shooting and with the idea of murder itself.
That makes sense with what we saw in those videos that need to turn their lives into something horrific.
Yeah.
What about Tori? Does he still claim he was just playing along?
He does. He still says he's innocent, that he was just going along with Brian and never wanted to hurt Cassie. But the videos, especially his own words and actions, tell a different story. It seems like he's just trying to distance himself from what he did.
The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, it's a truly tragic and haunting case. It makes you think about human nature and the darkness that can hide in seemingly ordinary people.
It's a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it's right there in front of us, disguised as teenage angst or curiosity or a need for attention.
Cassie's story is a reminder for all of us to be more aware, more compassionate, and to do more to protect the young people in our lives.
And even in such a dark story, there are lessons to be learned. We can find hope in working together to prevent these tragedies from happening again.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Cassie Jo Stoddart murder. It's a case that raises tough questions that will stay with us. Yeah, definitely.
We hope you'll keep thinking about this case, share your thoughts, and maybe even your own experiences. Together, we can work towards a world where stories like Cassie's are a thing of the past.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.